Welcome to the Philos Project podcast. I'm your host, Dominique, and today I'm bringing you the second installment in our weekly news update in partnership with TPS IL. TPS IL is Israel's only wire agency or news syndicate that disseminates information to news platforms across not just Israel, but the world. I'm speaking today with Rachael Stern. She's the director of operations at TPS IL. She has an extensive background in international affairs and counterterrorism. She studied counterterrorism and government at university and served as a lone soldier in the IDF's International Affairs Unit. Her work has been crucial. She'll discuss what that is in today's episode and kind of give some context to how TPS IL works. But her role is the bridge between the syndicate and the international community and their partners around the globe. She also works to certify news, including videos and photography on the ground in Israel before it goes out to publication. Her work has been critical, especially on October 7th, following the massacres and disseminating that information to partners in Israel and around the globe. Today, we're going to discuss news coming out of Israel, including the ceasefire with Lebanon, the complexities in that counteroffensive for Israel in the north, as well as some tragic news about two Israeli hostages who have been recovered in Gaza. I hope you enjoy the episode. Rachael, welcome to the Philos Project podcast in partnership with TPS Israel. I'm so excited to have you.
Thanks, Dominique, for having me.
So I gave an introduction as to who you are and your background, but if you could give a few words, anything you'd like to share, and then also about TPS Israel, since you represent them, that would be great.
Sure, absolutely. I'm the director of operations for TPS IL, which essentially means that I wear a lot of hats. But more importantly, we are the press service of Israel. We are Israel's only wire agency. A lot of people don't know what a news agency is. So I'll just give a brief overview. And essentially, that means that every time there is a news event happening throughout the country, we send one of our photographers to go and record the actual coverage. So basically, if there's a stabbing in Jerusalem or there's something that's happened, some kind of event, news event in Judea, Shomron area, we send one of our stringers, which is a photojournalist. They'll take a picture of the coverage, send it to our professional news desk. We attach the context, and then we send it out to other private and public news agencies internationally, as well as news customers. So that's actually how most people internationally get their news, is from a local wire service, and we're Israel's.
Oh, that's amazing. That's so cool. It's like true journalism, which I feel like doesn't really exist as much
Hard
anymore.
news, because it's
Hard
not,
news, yeah.
yeah, it's not layered with opinions and this and that. It's just facts. Hey, this is what happened. This is the scene. And just to add on, the reason why we actually do what we do is really just to be able to convey the actual accurate and timely news as fast as possible to the international world, as a way of also being able to defeat all of this misinformation and really be able to combat essentially fake news by just providing the world with really what's happening, the first headline, what's going on. And in that way, we're able to access over 7 million throughout the world in the last year.
Wow.
So
That's incredible. And that's so important, as you said, to combat misinformation. And what about yourself? How did you arrive at TPSIL?
Actually, it's kind of a funny story, but I was a lone soldier in Israel. And then afterwards, I went to school here. And one of my lecturers was preaching about media in the conflict zones. And that was his frame of reference, everything that he knows. And he just happened to be the CEO of TPSIL. And after I graduated, I sent him a message and I was like, you know what, you're actually working with the tool, as far as I'm concerned, that has the most potential to really move the dial in terms of correcting this international very negative rhetoric on Israel. And so I started working here, and I haven't stopped.
Amazing. That's awesome. I love that. And we appreciate y'all's work because it's so important, especially for us to then get that information and give it to our audience here in the United States, or mostly in the United States, and our Christian audience.
Mhm.
So we have a lot to talk about this week. Some news coming from the north. I know that TPSIL did an article on a lot of the national parks are now reopening. Could you tell us a little bit about that? And are people now returning to their homes in the north, or has that not yet happened?
Yeah, so there is a slow migration back. As far as we're concerned, it's just to be able to have something entertaining, something natural, and something that also is governmentally funded. Obviously, beginning to open up again is humongous news. The borders are still closed, of course, and anything's close to the border is still closed. But the national parks are opening up. There's a lot of teams that are inspecting all of the trails for hazards, missile debris, but we've had over 165,000 rockets since October 7th, killing over 77 people in the north, I believe, and injuring almost 757. So obviously, still a concern is the protection and security. And there's been a lot of wildfires as well that have burnt through a lot of land, 230 million square acres. And the war isn't over, but at least we've been able to defeat so much of Hezbollah that we're able to retreat them and be able to provide Israelis with at least some kind of nature experience, because right now a lot of the country is blocked off and people have not been able to return to their communities, and there's no infrastructure.
And we've talked a lot, even on my podcast, about just the psychological toll that the war has taken on the people living in Israel. So having, natural beauty to go out and maybe
Oh
escape
yeah,
or use
and the
as therapy, I think is
animals.
so important. Yeah.
Mhm. I mean, the animals, like people don't, think about this very often, but I can only imagine like how terrified, first of all, they are of the deer and everything like that, of all of these missile attacks, and also and the birds. There's birds have taken. I mean, it's not funny. The birds have taken a huge toll, and ultimately, it's just there's a lot of agriculture. So all of these farms and all of this, like I said, infrastructure that was hundreds of years is kind of been decimated. So it's just a slow process to moving back. But I hope that the opening of the national parks will give people some enjoyment, some respite.
And some hope. Yeah, that's a great point too, because I think here in the United States, we don't think about what a total war on, a society looks like. And when I've been
Yeah.
to Israel, we've done some work on kibbutzim and helping even just farmers, because there isn't a labor force to help with yielding all those crops. So that's something that here in the United States we don't think about, parks closing and farms not having the resources to yield their crops, which is their source of income. So it's an all encompassed. It's a war on really Israeli society at large.
Oh yeah, the collateral damage is devastating.
Mhm. Yeah. Um, There's also a lot of news coming out of the North with a ceasefire. Could you give a little bit of context as to what the ceasefire is between Israel and then Hezbollah, and if that's been upheld? I know that there was news this week that the Israel defense minister said if Lebanon doesn't uphold their end of the ceasefire, or Hezbollah, then there will be no distinction moving forward between Hezbollah and then the official Lebanese government.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, ultimately, what we're understanding is that where our options are, either our war is against Hezbollah, not Lebanon. So the Lebanese army also has to really take a step up and really be able to kind of handle Hezbollah, or basically we're saying that Israel will have to. Those are their options. So it kind of falls on Lebanon to now take responsibility for, unfortunately, this terrorist organization that they've allowed to completely circumvent and infiltrate their entire structure. So Israel, in an attempt to safely pull out of Lebanon, and also for, of course, our northern residents to and the priority of them being able to go back to their homes, they're saying that there has to be a sort of mechanism to prevent Hezbollah from it basically eliciting another October 7th. That is the ultimate goal. And without any kind of mechanism preventing this, there will be no peace. So because Hezbollah is so heavily embedded into Lebanese infrastructure, governmental, economic, and every kind of component, security, of course, it has to be really like almost with tweezers picking out, through Lebanon, because again, our war is not with Lebanon. So there has to be a real distinction between the two. And our defense minister, Katz, he was basically saying that if there's a full-scale war between Israel and Hezbollah and it restarts and everything like that, in order to fully root out Hezbollah, Israel will not be able to just circumvent a lot of Lebanese infrastructure. We're going to go into Beirut, where we've really been side tracking, and that's just their potential repercussions if they're not upholding this ceasefire that we've orchestrated and put on the table for them.
And has Lebanon cooperated a lot with Israel in the war to weed out Hezbollah? Or is this kind of that warning, like help us or we're not going to be
It's a
able
warning.
to be as discriminate? Okay.
It's definitely a warning. I think it's a very strong warning, and I think the wording is as well. And I think also we had our, one of our government, army spokesperson, Agari. He also, I think, went on Sky News Arabia and also said, "Look, this is a delicate procedure right now. We're trying to stop Iran from going through Syria, arming Hezbollah again. Um, if you're going to allow this to happen in your country, we're going to do what we have to do to protect ours."
Hmm. And just to remind our audience here in the United States, because that's sometimes difficult to comprehend or sort out, is that Hezbollah really acts as a shadow government alongside or parallel to the official Lebanese government. And so it's a quite complicated
Yeah.
strategic. Mm-hmm.
I would also say they're more than anything else just an extension of Iran. So
Mm-hmm.
because they're a proxy war, well, they've orchestrated a proxy war through Hezbollah. We'll see what happens now that Syria is also has. We've got a lot of chaos in this Middle East. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we did an episode on Syria and the
Mhm.
power vacuum that Israel's war with Hezbollah and Lebanon kind of created, and it's so interesting to see like the chess pieces moving in real time.
Right.
Um, so on the topic of Iran and their proxies, so I know that Israel has been now kind of countering Iran's front on the cyber side of things. I know some 200 Iranian cyber attacks were uncovered by Israel. Could you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. This has been an ongoing issue. I think we've seen it's actually kind of funny. I'll just give some contextual societal like points. I think that a lot of Israeli society largely has made jokes about this, about every time somebody gets a call or this and that, it's like, oh, it's Iran trying to infiltrate, and it's funny to a certain degree, but it's not,
Mm.
because there's been so many phishing scams and attempts to really infiltrate the Israeli infrastructure. For instance, like just in the last week, right, Israel uncovered over 200 different phishing attempts um,
Oh, wow. So
against
that's
like
even just in the last week.
yeah, just over
Wow.
governmental officials, civilians, but more so, trying to get into accounts, personal
Mm.
information, of course, and then coordinate assassinations. So it's really an act of war, 100%, and not even passive aggressive at this point. But Israel, from out the last year and a half, I guess it's been over 426. I think
Mhm.
days of the war, just so many numerous Irani spying attempts, and there's really a huge attempt right now to crack down on this, because there's been Israelis that have been participating, that have been arrested left and
Mm.
right. There was a Israeli that was arrested spying on it for a nuclear scientist.
Wow.
There was a couple who were gathering intel on sensitive like national infrastructure, and there's just been so many incidents. So this is something that the Israeli government is really trying to crack down on. The police and people are monitoring. People are nervous.
Mm. That's so wild to think
Mhm.
about. Also a cyber front. Um,
Oh yeah, I mean the
it's
hospitals, right? Like that's to me like the
mm,
worst possible scenario. Like if they have access to
mm,
that, credit card issues, like there's a breadth of potential. I mean, it's home front terrorism as well. So
mm. That's so wild. And I know there's an article this week that you sent to me about Israel's kind of startup industry. Has there been any kind of help or merger between like the private sector and Israel's startup companies with helping to combat a lot of the cyber attacks? I don't know if you would know about that, but is there collaboration between the public and private sector on that front?
I'm sure there is. I'm not personally aware of it, but I would understand that probably a lot of it's kind of like under the table, secretive stuff. But I think that
Hmm.
I'm sure that there is, because there's a lot of merging anyways between our higher like intelligence ranks and everything within the army, and then obviously these are very very capable and very intelligent people that go off. They put one foot out the door, they open up a startup, and then they continue assisting. So that's definitely commonplace, I think, within civil
Hmm.
society here. But I'm sure there's definitely many organizations, and not just that. We have a very skilled
Hmm.
Shin Bet. So as we've seen in the last even 4 months, they've done work that's, I mean, there's no words for it. It's basically just miracles. So,
Hmm.
but in
Yeah, I'm
terms,
sitting here
yeah,
thinking about that. I'm just thinking about like just
yeah.
200 cyber attacks in 1 week. And then you have the conventional war front, both in the North and the South. It just, a miracle, I think, is a
Oh yeah,
great
then
way
you
to
have the
just
mercenaries.
describe.
We have
Yeah.
mercenaries in Syria. We have Iran. We have Yemen. We have and Houthis, I would say. And I mean, it's just the amount of potential that is going on. And then we also have internal issues. So I think that
Hmm.
there's just like been so much going on, and the fact that we're able to juggle everything is honestly, I think, a feat that will be illustrated maybe not next year in 2 years, but I think in the next coming future and everything like that. This will be the stories of
Hmm.
generations to come.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Um, let's talk about the article you sent me about the Israeli startup with the mosquito control and using AI.
So absolutely. So on Sunday, just like as a testament to just the huge variety of information that we're able to cover throughout the country, and not just the variety of articles that we try to produce, because Israel is not just security issues, of course. There is so much more to our tiny country, and I think that there's an amazing amount of technological advances that are really coming out, even like during wartime. So I think that's really really critical to highlight these things.
Hmm.
So there's a very funky, cool startup called Diptera.ai, and they are working to essentially eliminate malaria by way of raising and releasing sterile male mosquitoes. So I thought that this is a very, very creative attempt personally, but these sterile male mosquitoes mate with wild females, reducing or even eliminating the mosquito population. It's not a new thing to sterilize these mosquitoes, but it's apparently very expensive and time consuming, and it really hasn't been fully utilized. But this technology is going to enable countries to do this in mass. They've already been able
Wow.
to do incredible advantage. I think they said that they released about 4 million mosquitoes into the
Wow.
wild that are sterile. And it's very impactful because malaria kills a child under 5 every 68 seconds. So this could
Mhm.
potentially change and eliminate, this disease like in an exponential level.
Wow. Yeah, and for developing nations as well. I even think of in Africa.
Absolutely.
I have
Look, I
family
mean, Bill
members
Gates has
who go on
been
mission trips. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
So
That's so crazy. That's incredible. So Israel's not only defending their territory from a security front and their homeland, but they're also saving the world of malaria. No, but I think it, to your point, it highlights that Israel's not only surviving during this time of war, but a lot of the industry is also very much thriving. And I think that's just like another miracle, a miracle, like we were talking
and very
about. So.
and very exactly, and very important to also to capitalize on. I think that because I know this from my position and from what we do at TPSIL, but there's such a need and there's such a huge demand for infrastructure and security and terrorism and all the news that's connected to that. But just as important are these soft stories, which really highlight the culture of ingenuity that we have here,
Mhm.
and the desire of Israelis to make the world genuinely a better place. And I think that that's really critical to show and to express and to highlight, because not everybody is just engaged like in the war such war efforts, such suffering, such no, we're a developing country that also has a lot to provide the world. So
Mhm.
I think that is a testament to, yeah, to the
Yeah,
Israeli spirit.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I want to end on a note of remembrance for some news coming out on a few hostages. Maybe you could speak to that. I know there was one gentleman from Be'eri who was taken, and then the American Israeli soldier Omer Neutra, who was thought to be taken hostage on October 7th. Actually, it's been revealed that he was likely killed, and his body was then taken to Gaza on that day. And so both are heartbreaking stories.
Yeah, absolutely. As an American and also as an Israeli, it's always difficult to hear these stories coming out, and we never know. At least I never know. I think, well, I would say larger Israeli society, whether to feel a moment of almost appreciation for the fact that at least we are finding a body and can give it a proper burial and memorial, and have an understanding of what happened versus the criminality of just the unknown.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, on Monday, it was found that American Israeli Omer Neutra was declared dead. He was murdered on October 7th, and his body was being held by Hamas. And one thing that I think is very critical to point out is that, after the other week, I think 2 weeks ago, Netanyahu, he offered $5 million for any civilians that's holding bodies. But at the same time, we understand that Hamas is, on one hand, the governing body, but at the same time, not the only terrorist organization within Gaza. So we also have the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. There's other infrastructures. It's very much the wild, wild west, like very mafia. And I think that individuals largely have not just bodies, but also hostages still, and are afraid to come with them and expose them. So we're seeing a lot of this, and I think we'll continue to see. I know that we have wonderful infrastructure at TPS IL, just that we're able to report on this and get the information out really as quickly as possible. This is the critical information that we need, that the world needs to hear. And we've been able to report on and also, of course, convey the information. Israel has rescued 8 live hostages since the beginning of the war, and unfortunately 28 bodies have been recovered from Gaza, mostly all of them murdered by Hamas. And then we have, this week we have this Itay Svirsky, I hope I'm saying that correctly, and his body was recovered by the IDF the other day in an operation, which we still don't know all of the details, but we do know that Hamas killed Itay after there was a nearby Israeli airstrike. That's what the understanding is. He was a resident of Be'eri, but he lived in Tel Aviv, and he went to visit his parents for the holidays and was kidnapped. And he was with Noah Argamani, who was released this past summer, very dramatically, and they were together in a couple of these propaganda videos that were released. So she actually also posted something about this, but it seems that, like I said, he was shot by his captors following the Israeli strike, and we don't know why yet, but we can only assume from the information and the data that we received that Hamas thought that there was a rescue operation that was imminent, and so, of course, instead of hold the body for ransom, they just prefer to kill him.
I think it highlights the just sheer evil calculus of Hamas. Is just so, even the fact that like killing him or getting the $5 million ransom reward, like to them that calculus, like taking his life to inflict the trauma and the psychological terror on Israelis is more important to them. So it's just
The value
evil.
of life is so much less significant than really anything else, and I think that is something that we have continued to see throughout the last year. I know that I personally have a lot of connections to the Gazan news agencies. There's no free press in Gaza. I always remind people this, but when I do see things and have access to things, I'm reminded constantly that there's just a different modus of value systems.
And really quickly, could you help my Western, mostly Christian audience understand? Because I think there's also an ethno-religious context to even like holding the hostages' bodies, because in Judaism it's so important to bury the body. Is that something that then Hamas, does to inflict further just trauma on a Jewish society?
Yeah, I feel like almost they have a multiple point structure to infiltrating, I think, Israeli society. One thing I think that also is very, very critical, and this was something that was always conveyed to me personally, is that throughout the history of modern day Israel, there was never females that were allowed to go and cross the border in combat because of the potential ramifications of what could happen to a body. So is very, very critical to Israeli society and has always been a huge component. And then now, of course, as we see so many young females and females in general just were kidnapped, it's a huge weak point. And something that's felt, I think, universally. But yeah, the burial component of Judaism and in general, just which I'm not probably the most skilled to speak on, but I will say as somebody who's witnessed and everything, that it's like the ability for one to ascend, and that's what allows for somebody to really be at peace, and it also provides a huge component for the family, and not, of course, after war and everything like that, in the context of everything, it's more important. But I think for Judaic tradition as well, this is very fundamental for the country, and not leaving bodies behind for them to be desecrated too by terrorists. It's
Mhm.
also for morale.
Mm. In closing, could you speak to, I think you made a really great point as well, that, Gaza doesn't have a free press. What are some of the implications of that? And do you see a free flow of information going into Gaza, or are they really controlling to what their population sees?
Well, I think one thing I always like to highlight is that I think the larger international audience does not recognize the news and what they're getting from uh,
Mm.
the source. I've seen many a time that there is an average civilian put on a press jacket and then they are suddenly a member of press. Now, if we remember, like also
Mm.
if you can look online, the Freedom House has Gaza. There is no free press, so that means that
Mhm.
when we look at Al Jazeera, for instance, they're banned in most of the Middle East, 5, 6 different countries, I believe. They're an
Mm.
outset of the Qatari government. They're a long arm of the Qatari government. They're essentially propaganda. UAE banned them, Jordan, Egypt, etc. Um, and then same with Gaza. Like there have one of the 14, at least that I've counted, news agencies as a budget that was released $32 million. And of course, the whistleblower in that scenario was never seen or heard from again. But the
Mm.
amount of funding that goes into the propaganda that they perpetuate is incredible. And what we as Israel's news agency really see on a daily basis and kind of combat is that there's a lot of different international news organizations that are deriving freelancers from within this infrastructure, and that's the dangerous point because the news is not coming by way of accuracy. It's not coming by way of truth.
Mhm.
And we see that in the ultimate ramifications on diaspora Jews because we see a direct influence on rising anti-Semitic violence and the degradation of Judeo-Christian values. Right? It's not just, and we see this throughout the world. It's become a electro wave, and
Mhm.
and this is really our job, I think, as members of society that really desire and believe in Western values, liberal values, to be able to say, hey, like this is fake. This is not legitimate
Mhm.
news. This is not being perpetuated by a source that is accurate. I am not going to follow this. I'm not going to listen to this. And we see this on a day-to-day basis. It arrives in our front, desks in the morning when you get the New York Times, and it's deliberately misconstrued by way of a title, right? A headline, an entire situation. I've seen time and time again on social media this echoing, and it's dangerous.
Mm. It is, and I see it here in the United States. Like even my my old classmates from grad school, who like I was in all the same classes with them. We did the same study abroad program on human rights and the Holocaust. So people who should have like the knowledge to see through the propaganda will be reposting stuff coming out of Gaza that is so clearly unchecked from just being an accurate source of news and is just an arm of propaganda. And that becomes the truth, though. So that's something I think about often is in our media age, it doesn't really matter what is true or not true or accurate. If it's the perceived truth, and that's the narrative that's taken and run with. And we see that even then reported, as you mentioned, in the New York Times and then what's supposed to be credible, publications. So it's a wild, even it's a new front, I would say,
Oh,
in
absolutely.
war.
The largest.
This unconventional. Yeah, it's wild. It's so wild.
And I will say this as well, just as a closing point, I think that, like I said, it's the responsibility of the individual consumer to really be able to understand that, hey, if you're reading a piece and it has, a byline by AP, which is largely, the copy paste AP internationally, or AFP, which is French, or Reuters, you can understand the context knowing that, hey, on October 7th, they had freelancers directly that were coming in and taking pictures and kissing Sinwar on the cheek. And
Mhm.
when you have that understanding, you can, okay, well, maybe I should look a little bit deeper into this. And then, you can also look at the article and say, hey, who is who is being interviewed? What are the perspectives? If it's Doctors Without Borders or the Red Cross or any of these international organizations, you think to yourself, oh, okay, well, they haven't once visited a single Israeli cause, not
Mhm.
once helped a single hostage. UNRWA, another branch of Hamas, as
Mm-hmm.
far as most of the world. I mean, I think that
It's
these
true. Yeah.
organizations, like, we understand that they've abandoned Israel, and it's not. They're not allowed to be political, but they've become. And
Mm-hmm.
so then I
Mm-hmm.
think it's down to, like you said, your classmates and etc. Why? Like, why? And I think that that's a question that I think everybody has to ask
Yeah.
themselves when they're trying to be responsible about perpetuating news.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess the why is it fits a narrative. And it's just crazy to see how media has also become politicized and absorbed. It's supposed to be unbiased and just report the news, but it's become so biased. It's dangerous to live in an age with so much misinformation, but that's why we're grateful for TPS IL and all the work you guys are doing. So thank you so much, Rachel, for coming on.
Thanks, Dominique. And thank you to the Philos Project.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode in partnership with TPS IL. If you would like to learn more about regional security dynamics in Israel, I encourage you to go check out our Pathfinder course. It's completely free. It's taught by the extraordinary Walter Russell Mead and will provide great context to some of the information we discussed in today's episode. We also have a course on Lebanon taught by our very own Habib Malik, which would also provide some context to the relationship between Israel and Lebanon prior to the start of this war. I also encourage you to follow and check out TPS IL. They have a website where all of the news that we talked about today is published, along with many other stories. And you can subscribe to the Philos Project channel and click the notification bell so that you know every time we post a video here, along with my colleagues, such as Luke's reaction videos and Philos Catholics Beyond Rome podcast. Thank you so much, and I will see you in our next episode.